Good morning. Good morning. All right, good morning. So Chairman Norris is at a meeting across the street on opioids this morning, and Vice Chairman Waters was going to convene the meeting, but he's on a meeting on opioids? Not on opioids, no. Thank you, Isla. Now that I've thrown that out into the rumor mill. Yeah, no, the chairman is at a meeting about opioids this morning. The vice chairman was going to convene this meeting this morning, but he's not here yet, and the chairman has asked me to go ahead and begin the meeting in his absence. We don't have any items that require a quorum or a vote today, so I think it's proper for me to go ahead and convene the meeting. So we'll go ahead and start with tab 7, Nathan Shaver, Senior Research Associate. While Nathan's coming up, though, I wanted to share a staff update that I meant to share yesterday and didn't, which is I just wanted to also acknowledge that we had 2 interns. Unfortunately, the commission never had the opportunity, most of the commission members didn't have the opportunity to meet them. They did attend our local government working group meetings, and that was James White, who is a actually a combination law student, Master's of Public Administration student at the University of Tennessee, and Mariah Green, who is in the Peabody program on education master's program at Vanderbilt. So I would also like to share that at one point, James White, Mariah Green, and our Deputy Executive Director, Melissa Brown, were all in a room working on a project together, and Melissa noted that Brown, White, and Green all together in one room, is this a meeting or a game of Clue? All right, sorry, Nathan, on that note.
So before we begin on the criminal statutes limitations study, we're going to have a speaker come up and testify about this. Her name is Donna Coulter, and she's a survivor of child abuse and an advocate for the elimination of child sexual abuse statutes and limitations.
Good morning.
My name is Donna Coulter. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. My name is Donna Coulter, and I was sexually abused from the age of 5 until I left home at 17. My abuser was my father. Like most kids, I kept it a secret and was threatened to keep silent as well. My earliest memory in my life was being home alone with my father. He began by putting his fingers in my vagina and told me not to tell anyone. At 5 years old, I knew it was very wrong because of the way I felt. I told my mother immediately when she returned home what had happened, and with a collective laugh, I was dismissed as a child in the things they say. Although I tried to avoid my father, there were times I could not get away in the small house we lived in Rutherford County. The sexual abuse progressively got worse from the repeated digital penetration, fondling, and ultimately intercourse. This abuse continued until I left home at the age of 17. When I was in junior high, however, I told the school guidance counselor. Yet again, nothing was done and my abuse continued. My cries for help were never answered. To this day, my abuser has never faced prosecution, even though he has admitted to the abuse in varying degrees over the years. I was never removed from the home for my safety. Although I escaped the ongoing repeated abuse at home, I would not escape the detrimental effects that childhood sexual abuse has had on me. It can take many years for an adult with a history of child abuse to even come forward, for fear of opening up the shame that typically consumes all victims and the possibility that nothing would ever be done. Victims of childhood sexual abuse often experience physical, emotional, and detrimental health problems, sometimes in the form of chronic illnesses. In my experience, it became normal to live in a persistent fight or flight state for many years of my childhood, something that has been attributed to chronic adrenal fatigue in adults. Many other victims go on to be diagnosed with chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and other varying muscle diseases, to name a few. My point is that childhood sexual abuse victims not only suffer while they're young, their health can and does suffer for a lifetime. How do you help the victims who have endured such horrific experiences at the hands of predatory abusers? Remove the statute of limitations in the state of Tennessee and take every measure necessary to protect and seek justice for these victims. Aggressive prosecution and serving justice goes a very long way in the healing process. I still struggle with the impact because my abuser was never prosecuted. You have the power to help so many victims get the justice they so richly deserve. Please join many other states in the U.S. and remove the statute of limitations in the state of Tennessee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments from the commission? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this morning. Nathan?
Good morning. Thank you, Commission members. Today I'll be presenting the Commission's draft report and recommendations on Tennessee's criminal statutes limitations for your review and comment. The report is behind tab 7 in your docket books in front of you. This report was directed by Public Chapter 849 of 2018, which directed the Commission to perform a study on Tennessee's criminal statutes of limitation and specified that the study include information on the effect of statutes of limitation on the prosecution of sexual offenses. As you just heard from Ms. Coulter, this report was prompted by the testimony of a child sexual abuse survivor whose abuser escaped prosecution because of the state's statute of limitation expiring before the crime was reported. Unfortunately, stories like Ms. Coulter are not rare. There are numerous stories across the country of child sexual abuse survivors who never see their abusers held criminally accountable because of an expired statute of limitation. This report focuses on issues with child sexual abuse statutes of limitations. So first, I'll give you some background information.
Excuse me just a second, Nathan. For the members, you do have a copy of the slides as well to follow along. Thank you. Sorry.
So first I'll give you some background information about statutes of limitations, why we have them, why the limitation periods are generally longer for certain crimes, and how we compare to other states. Then I'll end by going over the draft recommendations for your review and comment. So what are they? Statute of limitation is simply a deadline for bringing a legal action, and they've been part of the American legal system since its beginning. They exist in both criminal and civil law. As directed by the law creating this study, this report focuses on criminal statutes of limitations. In the criminal law context, statutes of limitations establish periods within which prosecution can be commenced. After the relevant statutes of limitation periods expire, the state can no longer bring charges, even if more than enough evidence of the perpetrator's guilt is later obtained. State lawmakers are free to lengthen or eliminate these limitation periods as long as they don't try to revive criminal prosecution that is already time barred, which is unconstitutional according to U.S. Supreme Court precedent. Criminal statutes of limitations are common across the 50 states but are not universal. In fact, 5 states and several other countries do not have any statutes of limitations on any felony crimes. The 5 states without any limitation periods, for example, for any felonies include Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Wyoming. In the states that have them, they vary significantly in their length, but in general, crimes that are considered more serious have longer statute of limitation periods. So why do we have these statutes of limitations and what are their purposes? These limitation periods are a matter of legislative choice and represent efforts to balance the interests of protecting the defendants from wrongful charges while maintaining public safety and finding justice for victims. The draft report explains that they exist to protect the defendant against unfair prosecutions after evidence has deteriorated and memories have faded, and to provide an incentive for efficient prosecutorial action in criminal cases. According to legal scholars, there is no science for calculating the precise duration that most fairly balances these interests for each crime. For the worst crimes, most states have eliminated the statute of limitations because the benefits of statute of limitations are outweighed by other considerations, such as the need to find justice for the victim and society's interest in identifying rapists and murderers. According to legal scholars, the idea that an offender of a particularly terrible crime should escape criminal accountability and punishment and proceed with their lives as though nothing has happened because a certain amount of time has passed goes against the public's sense of justice and fairness. So what is Tennessee's current law on criminal statutes limitations? Tennessee's general criminal statutes limitation periods are based on the level of the crime. So 15 years for a Class A felony, which is considered the worst, 8 years for Class B, 4 years for a Class C or D, 2 years for a Class C felony, and 1 year for misdemeanors. So as the draft report goes into further detail about, there are, however, various exceptions to these general statutes limitations. For example, first-degree murder, a Class A felony, has no statute of limitations. As Table 1 on pages 17 and 18 shows, Tennessee has expanded the limitation periods for most felony child sex crimes to either 15 or 25 years after the victim turns 18 years of age. This means that for many child sexual abuse crimes, victims have until age 43 for those crimes to be prosecuted. The draft report provides additional information about this, and Tennessee's current law is provided as Appendix B, which starts on page 31. So for child sex crimes, the extension or elimination of these limitation periods are based on research showing that a relatively large percentage of child sexual abuse victims do not report the crime until well into adulthood, if they report at all, for justifiable reasons, including the severe trauma the abuse causes, as you heard earlier. According to some studies, only 1/3 of victims disclose in childhood, another 1/3 never discloses the abuse, and the remaining 1/3 discloses the abuse as an adult, with age 48 as the median age of disclosure of child sexual abuse. For those victims of child sexual abuse who do find the courage to come forward to law enforcement later as adults, an expired statute of limitation can block any hope of seeing the offender held criminally responsible. Since most states have opted to simply eliminate the statute of limitation instead of just extending it, you might ask why a state would eliminate instead of just extending. So in the news lately, you may have heard about the 2018 Pennsylvania grand jury report on child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. Only 2 out of the 301 priests named in the Pennsylvania report on child sexual abuse have been charged with crimes because the rest are protected from prosecution by the state's statute of limitations. The grand jury's report provides a good example of why advocates prefer elimination of the limitation period over just extending it. The report discusses how Pennsylvania's current law permits victims to come forward until age 50, and that it's better than it was before, but still not good enough. The grand jury report recommends eliminating the criminal statute of limitations for child sex abuse crimes. And it goes on to say that they heard from plenty of victims who are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and even one who is 83 years old, and that they want future victims to know that they will always have the force of the criminal law behind them no matter how long they live. So what are other states doing? The draft report explains that the national trend is to eliminate the criminal statutes limitations on most child sexual abuse crimes based on the research I mentioned. The majority of states have now eliminated most felony child sexual abuse crimes statute of limitations. In general, 10 states have eliminated the statute of limitations for all felony child sexual abuse crimes. 31 states have eliminated the statute of limitations for some, but not all, felony child sexual abuse crimes. And 9 states still have a statute of limitation on all felony child sexual abuse crimes. So map 1 on page 21 of the report provides the statute of limitation for one specific criminal offense, the crime of child rape, which is considered the worst child sex crime. You'll notice that 37 states have simply eliminated it. That's the light purple color. without any conditions, the statute of limitations on child rape or the equivalent offense in that jurisdiction, while 9 states still have a limitation period. 2 states, Oregon and Massachusetts, have eliminated the statute's limitations, but have laws requiring additional evidence for child rape prosecutions brought after long periods. In 2 states, Nevada and Tennessee, eliminated the statute of limitations for child rape, but only if the crime is reported within a certain time frame. While Nevada provides until age 36 for the victim to report the crime, which leads to the elimination of the statute of limitation period, Tennessee has a much shorter reporting window and requires that the child rape be reported within 3 years after it occurred for the limitations period to be eliminated. So there are 2 common concerns that are brought up by the ACLU and defense attorneys in opposition to the elimination of statutes of limitations. So one is cost and the other is unfair prosecution. So what would it cost if the state eliminated the statutes of limitations for most felony child sex crimes? While in general, it's difficult to accurately estimate the cost of eliminating these limitation periods for any crime because it's unknown how many cases would be prosecuted but for an expired statutes of limitations. Fiscal notes for prior legislation in Tennessee show that the cost of extending or eliminating child sexual abuse statutes of limitation would be either insignificant or relatively small. For example, a fiscal memo on a 2014 bill that would have originally simply eliminated the statute of limitations for all rape offenses was determined to be insignificant. And I have copies of these prior fiscal notes if anyone would like to see them. So is for concerns with unfair prosecution if statutes of limitations are eliminated? It should be noted that regardless of the existence of criminal statutes of limitations, it's important to note that the defendant retains all substantive and procedural rights to protect against accusations of crimes from the distant past without evidence. As the draft report explains, some stakeholders have raised concerns that the elimination of statutes of limitations would increase false accusations and lead to wrongful convictions. However, studies show that child sexual abuse false accusations are rare, and no evidence has been found to show that the extension or elimination of statutes of limitations leads to any increase in false accusations or wrongful convictions. Studies do show that without additional corroborating evidence, a single accusation of a decades-old child sexual abuse crime would be unlikely to lead to a successful prosecution. Of the small percentage of child sex crimes that are reported, only a small number will actually be prosecuted. According to one study, on average, 86% of reported sexual assaults to law enforcement are never referred to prosecutors. Where law enforcement has chosen to not refer a claim of alleged child sexual abuse, 81% cited insufficiency of evidence as their reason. For those referred to prosecutors, any case must ultimately still be proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the state. And for this reason, cases initiated after long periods will inevitably be rare and carefully selected. Please interrupt me if you have any questions at any point. So now I'll jump into the draft recommendations found at the beginning of the report in the summary section, and which are shown in bold in the summary. So the first recommendation involves the second-degree murder statutes limitation. We looked at all the criminal statutes of limitation, and while this was not the primary focus of the report, it was brought up as an issue in interviews with elected district attorneys. Under present law in Tennessee, first-degree murder has no statute of limitation. It's the only crime that has no statute of limitation without any conditions. So under present law in Tennessee, second-degree murder, which is also a Class A felony, has a 15-year statute of limitation. Some district attorneys have noted that the shorter 15-year statute of limitation period for second-degree murder has blocked attempts to prosecute homicide cold cases for which evidence exists to prove that the defendant killed the victim, but not enough evidence to show that the killing was premeditated. So without evidence of premeditation, the state is prevented from attempting to find justice for victims of cold case murders not solved within 15 years. So as shown in map 2 on page 24, In comparison, 48 states have no statute of limitation on the prosecution of second-degree murder. Only New Mexico has a shorter statute of limitation period for second-degree murder. The draft report recommends that the state may want to consider either extending or eliminating the statute of limitation for second-degree murder. The second recommendation is set up as a choice between two alternative policy options. The first is that Tennessee should consider fully eliminating the statute of limitation for most felony child sex abuse crimes, as has already been done in a majority of other states. Or alternatively, the second option, Tennessee should consider eliminating the statute of limitation for felony child sexual abuse crimes in circumstances where corroborating evidence is obtained by the prosecutor, similar to the Oregon and Massachusetts examples, which would still provide additional protection from unfair prosecution for the older cases. If corroborating evidence is not obtained, then the statute of limitation otherwise in place would apply. Massachusetts and Oregon provide examples of states that have eliminated the criminal statute of limitations for child sex crimes while attempting to balance the rights of defendants and victims for prosecutions brought long after the crime occurred by requiring that certain evidence conditions be met in order to bring a prosecution for sex crimes alleged to have occurred many years before. Massachusetts' law states that any indictment or complaint found and filed more than 27 years after the victim turns 16 years of age or reports the crime to law enforcement shall be supported by independent evidence that corroborates the victim's allegation. The law further provides that such independent evidence shall be admissible during trial and shall not consist exclusively of opinions of mental health professionals. So Oregon's law requires specified types of corroborating evidence for a prosecution brought more than 12 years after the victim turns 18. And Oregon's law is shown in Appendix C of the draft report in front of you. So charges can now be filed in Oregon at any time if either DNA evidence points to a suspect or the prosecuting attorney obtains other corroborating evidence of the sex crime. Oregon's law requires that the other corroborating evidence consists of at least one of the 5 categories listed in their law. These evidence considerations are found on page 22 of your draft report. So, for example, one of the corroborating evidence exceptions includes if other victims report similar crimes by the defendant. If multiple victims come forward alleging similar crimes by the defendant, it's more likely that the defendant committed the crimes. Another example is if the defendant confesses to the crime, or if there's physical evidence of the crime, such as videos or photographs of the crime. So now I'll turn to the final recommendation in the report, which addresses the correction of a drafting error in Tennessee's current law. To be certain, we confirmed our understanding of this drafting error with legislative attorneys and prosecutors. And as I mentioned earlier, over the last decade, while Tennessee has not fully eliminated the statute of limitations for most child sexual abuse crimes, it has extended them to either 25 or 15 years after the victim turns 18. And for rape offenses committed against minors, considered the most serious sex crimes, the state eliminated the statute of limitations in 2014, but placed a condition on its elimination. The victim must notify law enforcement or the district attorneys of the crime within 3 years after it occurs. If not, the limitation period otherwise in place would apply. The legislative intent was for the age of majority plus 25-year limitation period to remain in effect for rapes of minors not reported within that 3-year window. However, an apparent drafting error in the bill resulted in the statute of limitations for those crimes not reported within 3 years reverting to the shorter periods of 15 years for Class A and 8 years for Class B. So the following example illustrates the problem with this. If a 15-year-old child, if a 5-year-old child is raped in 2015 and does not notify authorities within the first 3 years, then she would have until age 20 to report the crime and for the prosecution to be commenced under current law. Whereas under the previous statute of limitation, before the drafting era, the child rape victim would have until age 43, which is 25 years after turning 18, to report the crime and for prosecution to be commenced. A review of the committee hearings on the bill and the interviews of stakeholders indicate that the shortening of the statute of limitations for rape offenses committed against minors for those victims that did not report within the first 3 years was not the intent of the law. So with that background provided, the draft report recommends that at a minimum, Tennessee law should be amended to clarify the drafting error found in current law. And the draft report further explains the issues on pages 18 and 19. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Do we have any questions or comments from the mayor?
Well, first, to our testimony, that takes a lot of guts. And thank you for coming and sharing your unfortunate experience. Having worked with folks in Shelby County and the area on domestic abuse for 16 years now, it is both male and female that suffer from this behavior. And I hope that my legislative friends on this commission can look at something to make it the punishment to hold people accountable for what they did in those times when they should have known better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to thank Ms. Coulter for coming forward and bringing this to our attention. As Mayor McDonald said, it does take a lot of courage and really guts to do that, and you're doing that to help others. And Commissioners, I do believe that we need to address this. It's something that I feel that if we remove it, as been suggested for the child felony sex abuse, and then in doing so, as with all the research that TACIR does, you've uncovered some other areas that need to be addressed, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Nathan. Again, the final report will be at our December meeting, at which time we'll be asking for approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Dr. Matt Owen is going to be giving us an update on the Commission's work on the small cell study. This report's not due until 2021, but we're leaning forward on it. It's part of a packet of reports we have involving broadband and communications issues. And Matt, I believe you also have an update on federal grants as well.
That's correct. I'm going to go off script for a little bit, so bear with me. So as Cliff alluded to, I have an update. This is actually an update based on my presentation at the May meeting where I talked about the Connect America Fund 2 auction program. And so you should have received a handout titled Connect America Fund Phase 2 Auction Results by State and County.
I don't think we have that.
And if that is not
It's
happening,
coming-
I see,
it's coming
I
around
see it
right
coming,
now.
sorry. Well, I'll go through the background as you're receiving the handout. So, as I mentioned in the May meeting, the Connect America Fund auction is one of several programs under the umbrella of the Federal Communications Commission. Connect America Fund, all of these programs are designed to offer funding to internet service providers to help them expand coverage in unserved and underserved areas. And they are funded through the Universal Service Fund, which is itself funded by fees on wireline and wireless telephone subscriptions. So for the auction, in general, census blocks that were eligible included those for which providers declined grant offers under the earlier Connect America Fund 2 program, which was from 2015, as well as those blocks that were deemed ineligible for the CAF 2 program, either because the cost to serve them was too high or because providers already reported offering service of at least 4 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload. So blocks that met those criteria were generally eligible for the auction so long as no provider reported offering service of at least 10 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload as of December 2016. I mentioned in May that the FCC had identified more than 1,900 census blocks in Tennessee, which contain nearly 13,000 homes and businesses, according to the FCC, that would be eligible for the auction. So this brings me to the handout. We found, or at least sifting through the FCC's website just this week, the FCC has actually announced the award winners for the auction. And so for Tennessee, 5 bidders in Tennessee were awarded support through the CAF2 auction process, and this is for projects in 17 counties around the state. In total, the winning bidders will receive combined $8.5 million over 10 years to support the expansion of coverage. And in exchange for that, they have committed to expanding coverage to 3,290 homes and businesses in these 17 counties. And so you can see on the chart that we pulled from the FCC's release, it shows by county and by bidder what support will be provided to that bid, as well as the number of locations that the bidder has committed to building out to receive that support. If there are no questions, I will proceed to my regularly scheduled presentation. All right, so let me get my handouts out here. So what I was originally going to talk about today, and what I will be doing for the rest of my presentation, is providing an update on our preliminary research that staff have conducted for the Commission's study of small cell wireless facilities as directed by Public Chapter 819, Acts of 2018. It's also known as the Competitive Wireless Broadband Investment, Deployment, and Safety Act of 2018. And Public Chapter 819 establishes a framework governing the deployment of small wireless facilities, which are a specific subset of facilities used for providing wireline communication services. The Act directs the Commission to study the effects of this new framework and identify best practices, both from the perspective of stakeholders and from a review of other states. And you can find the memo for my presentation and the associated attachments behind tab 8 in your docket books. So for today's update, I will focus on staff's preliminary research comparing Tennessee's new law to similar laws enacted in other states. And I would like to thank James White, who, as Cliff mentioned, interned with us this summer, for his valuable assistance in conducting research for this update. With that, I will draw your attention to the first attachment, Attachment A, which presents information compiled by the National Conference of State Legislatures, including a brief introduction to small wireless facilities, a list of states that have enacted small wireless facility laws, and a summary of small wireless facility legislation from the 2018 legislative session, both in Tennessee and in other states. Compared with the wireless communication facilities, including cell towers that have long made up providers' existing networks, small cells are short-range facilities that are small enough to be located on a variety of structures, such as streetlights, electric poles, and other structures in public rights-of-way, as well as buildings and other structures located outside public rights-of-way. They are being deployed as part of providers' efforts to build the next generation of wireless networks and service, sometimes referred to as 5G. These next generation networks are being built in response to growing demand for wireless internet service and capacity resulting from the rapidly growing number of individuals using wireless broadband, the growing demand for services such as streaming video that require high-speed connections, efforts to develop new applications of internet connectivity, especially around transportation, that will rely on consistent real-time connections, and the general proliferation of devices that are connected to the internet, often referred to as the Internet of Things. As the Commission found in its 2017 broadband report, these next-generation networks have provided speeds approaching 4 gigabits per second in testing. Within them, the new short-range small cell facilities will work in conjunction with providers' existing network facilities to support a broad array of internet functions by offering faster speeds and better reliability while reducing network congestion. So given the recent activity in this space, 20 states, Tennessee included, have passed laws creating specific frameworks governing the deployment of small wireless facilities. None of these laws predate 2014, and all have been either enacted or amended in the last 2 years. As you can see from the list in Attachment A, these states are located across the country, and there have also been a number of states where similar legislation has recently failed or remains pending. As for the 20 states that have passed these laws, they tend to address similar issues and policies governing the deployment of small wireless facilities. So if you will turn your attention to Attachment B, the table provides a comparison of the small wireless facility laws in these states across a set of broad categories that staff have grouped, including application logistics, fees, issues related to height, size, aesthetics, and location, grounds for denial, and pole attachments. I will use Tennessee's law as an example to help walk through these categories and then come back to the table as a whole. In terms of reading the table, if a box contains a check mark, it means that the state's small wireless facility law addresses the issue in that column. If the box is covered by a hatch, the state's small wireless facility law is silent on the issue. Now, this issue might still be addressed generally in another section of that state's code, but it is not specific to small wireless facilities. Also keep in mind that this table provides a view from the 30,000-foot level rather than a detailed comparison of these individual policy areas. So among the states that might have a check mark for a certain box, there still could be quite a bit of variation in terms of the specific policy enacted in that state. So first, I'll look at the category application logistics. Tennessee's law, which you can find on the top row of the table, addresses the types of applications, permits, and reviews for small wireless facilities that can be required under different circumstances, as well as the information that applicants can be required to provide. It establishes a timeline for processing applications, which for Tennessee can vary based on the number of small wireless facilities that a provider has applied for in either a 30-day or in some cases a 60-day window. And it addresses the number of small wireless facilities that can be combined into a single application, which in Tennessee is 20. The second broad category, fees. For this category, we've included both whether a state's small wireless facility law specifically sets maximum application fees and whether the law addresses the extent to which providers can be charged annual right-of-way use fees. Tennessee's law addresses both of these issues. In particular, it sets a maximum application fee that is calculated based on the number of small wireless facilities applied for in a single application. It's $100 per facility for the first 5 facilities in an application and $50 per facility for those remaining in the same application. The law also authorizes local governments to collect an additional fee of $200 total on the first application an applicant files to help cover startup costs for administration. As for the third category, issues related to height, size, aesthetics, and location, Tennessee's law addresses restrictions both on the height of new or replacement support structures and on the antennas of small wireless facilities. Like all of the 20 states with small wireless facility laws, Tennessee's law sets the maximum size for a small wireless facility and its associated equipment. Tennessee's law also addresses the requirements and reviews local governments can place on small wireless facilities located on historic properties or in areas subject to historic zoning regulations. And it authorizes local governments to require applicants to follow aesthetic plans that the local government has adopted for defined areas, so long as those plans set generally applicable, non-discriminatory standards for all entities with infrastructure in the right-of-way, and so long as they don't have the effect of precluding the deployment of small wireless facilities. In addition to that, the law also addresses policies, local policies that would require small wireless facilities or associated equipment to be placed underground. The fourth category on the table is grounds for denial. Many of the states with small wireless facility laws, including Tennessee, limit or address the grounds on which applications can be denied or limit the grounds on which application can be denied. In Tennessee, grounds for denial are limited to an applicant's failure to satisfy the conditions or requirements established in other sections of the Act, or failure to comply with generally applicable non-discriminatory requirements established by local governments pursuant to the Act. Finally, poll attachments, including both the timelines for those poll attachments and fees that can be charged. While Tennessee's law does not address the timeline for poll attachments, for the poll attachment process, it does address the maximum annual attachment fees that can be charged, albeit only for attachments to certain structures. Like many states, Tennessee's law exempts polls owned by electric distributors from its maximum attachment fees. And in Tennessee's case, the maximum annual fees don't apply on polls or other structures owned by private entities either. If we now look at the table in Attachment B as a whole, it shows that in general, the laws passed in these states address the same issues and policy areas broadly defined. There are, of course, exceptions. Some states, most notably Colorado, don't address as many of the issues identified in the table. And there are some policy issues, specifically the timelines for poll attachments, that aren't as commonly addressed as others. But at this level, we see a lot of similarity among the 20 states that have passed small wireless facility laws. Things look a little different when we view specific policies in greater detail. So whereas Attachment B lumps policies together in broad categories, Attachment C takes a closer look at the differentiation among states for a few selected policy areas. So if I could direct your attention to Attachment C, the first large chart that takes up the whole side of the first part of Attachment C. This first table shows the timeline for local governments to process complete applications under each state's small wireless facility law. Delaware is excluded from the table because its law applies only to its state Department of Transportation. These timelines cluster in the 60 to 90 day window and range from as little as 45 days in Missouri and North Carolina to as long as 120 days under certain circumstances in Tennessee, Hawaii, Iowa, and Minnesota. One thing to note is that Tennessee is one of 5 states in which the timeline varies depending on the number of small wireless facilities applications or small wireless facilities applied for in a period of time specified in state law. Those other states are Hawaii, Iowa, Minnesota, and Missouri. For Tennessee, local governments have 60 days to determine whether to approve an application if the applicant applies for no more than 30 small wireless facilities in a 30-day period. If the applicant applies for at least 31 but no more than 50 small wireless facilities in a 30-day period, then the local government has 75 days to determine whether to approve them. And if the applicant applies for more than 50 facilities in a 30-day period, then the local government has 90 days. Now, as I mentioned, there's a 120-day window that also applies to Tennessee. So if an applicant applies for more than 120 facilities in a 60-day period, then the local government can provide the applicant with the option of either having its facilities reviewed on that 120-day timeline or paying an additional $100 for each small wireless facility the applicant wants reviewed on the applicable shorter timeline. Also to note is that Tennessee is one of 3 states, including Utah and Virginia, where the 60-day timeline can be extended at the request of the local government. Under that circumstance, the timeline is extended to 75 days in Tennessee. In Utah, it would be extended to 70 days, and in Virginia, it would be extended to 90 days. Before going further, I'd also like to point out, for purposes of clarification, that the tables in Attachment C show how these frameworks apply to local governments. Tennessee's small wireless facility law, for example, adjusts certain aspects of this framework as they're applied to the Tennessee Department of Transportation. And several other states do the same, North Carolina and Virginia to name 2, while some states fully exclude facilities deployed in state rights-of-way from these frameworks altogether. So that would be a state like Arizona does that. Other states make no distinction. So if I could direct your attention back to Attachment C on the flip side of that attachment, and this will also, if we have the additional handout, that will go along with this attachment. I'm going to take the top table and the middle table together on the back side of Attachment C. because they form the basis of the calculations for the additional handout that you are now receiving, which compares maximum application fees. So first, that top table in Attachment C, on the back of Attachment C, shows the number of small wireless facilities that can be combined into a single application under each state's law. There are 4 states that don't set a maximum in their small wireless facility law, and 1 state, Arizona, is listed twice because it sets different maximums depending on whether the application is made to a city and town or to a county. The range on this table is from 15 facilities in Minnesota to 35 facilities in Virginia, as well as for applications made to counties in Arizona, with a cluster of states in the middle at 25. The second table in Attachment C, with the greenish, beige, blue, and orange, shows the maximum fee that local governments are authorized to charge for processing applications under each state's law. There are 3 states, Colorado, Minnesota, and Hawaii, that don't set maximum fees. Rhode Island is not shown because it does not specify a dollar amount as its maximum, but rather caps fees at the lesser of actual cost or the fees charged for processing applications for new utility poles. And again, Delaware is not shown because its law applies only to its State Department of Transportation, while Arizona is listed twice because its maximum fee varies depending on whether the application is made to cities and towns or to counties. States have adopted 3 general methods for calculating the maximum application fees local governments are authorized to charge. Staff have identified 2 states in the greenish-beige boxes that set maximum application fees on a per-application basis, regardless of the number of facilities in those applications. In contrast, 13 states set maximum fees on a per-facility basis. So of these 13, staff have identified 4, which are in the blue boxes, that set maximum application fees, or where the maximum application fee per facility is a flat rate. In the 9 remaining states in the orange boxes, the per facility fee varies based on the number of facilities in an application. So as I mentioned earlier, Tennessee and 4 other states, the maximum fee is $100 per facility for the first 5 facilities in an application and $50 per facility for those remaining in the same application. At the other end of the spectrum, Illinois charges $650 for an application containing a single facility and $350 per facility for applications with multiple facilities. So to put these tables together and more fully illustrate a comparison of the maximum fee rates and their effect, the handout you've received calculates the total maximum fee or the aggregate maximum fee that local governments are authorized to charge for processing applications for 100 small wireless facilities in each state. Staff's calculations assume that the applicant submits the minimum number of applications necessary for 100 small wireless facilities based on the maximum number of facilities that can be combined in a single application under state law, and that the local government charges the maximum fee for processing those applications. As with the middle table in Attachment C, Colorado, Minnesota, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and Delaware are excluded, and Arizona is once again listed twice. The range here is quite large, from a low of $400 in Florida to a high of $35,000 in Illinois. Tennessee, however, is among several states where the maximum aggregate fee for 100 small wireless facilities is around $6,000. Finally, if we return to Attachment C to the bottom table, the small bottom table at the bottom, that table addresses whether local governments are authorized to seek reimbursement from applicants for consultant fees. This issue is specifically addressed in only 11 of the states with small wireless facility laws. Of these 11, Tennessee and Texas are the only states that prohibit local governments from seeking reimbursement from applicants for consultant fees. In 9 other states, local governments are authorized to seek reimbursement for at least some fees. By way of conclusion, staff's preliminary research has found that the 20 states that have passed small wireless facility laws have generally followed a similar framework and addressed similar issues. The differences that staff have identified at the individual policy level usually exist along a continuum, with states clustering together in the middle. The challenge going forward in terms of identifying best practices in other states will be determining whether any of these differences has a measurable effect on deployment or on state agencies and local governments. And lest we lose sight of the 30 states that currently don't have or haven't passed these laws, whether any effects can be linked to the mere presence or absence of a law specifically governing the deployment of small wireless facilities. So in addition to continuing to monitor other states, we will also keep an eye on any changes at the federal level. The agenda for the Federal Communications Commission's September 26th meeting includes an item that, if adopted, would establish a federal framework governing timelines and fees, and among other issues, for a subset of small wireless facilities. So staff will continue to collect information pursuant to the directive in Public Chapter 819 Acts of 2018, and the final report and any recommendations are due to the General Assembly by January 1st, 2021. I thank you for your time, and I am happy to address any questions you might have.
Mayor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this work, Dr. Owens. In terms of fees and regulations, it's very in-depth. There are two things as you continue your work, well, one specifically and one that might just apply to us in Shelby County, but there's still the issue of interference in our right-of-ways where, you know, under the law, how broad did the legislation give them to put stuff where we might need to expand a sewer pipe or something in the future and not know that they've got wires there. So if you would focus on that some for us, please, because I would want the legislators to know what kind of trouble that would cause us in the future, because even though the poles are up, the little spaceship-looking things are up on the poles, their wires have to go somewhere too. The second thing will be who, in some jurisdictions, who owns the light pole, so that you can apply that fee, because it talks about being owned by a utility, and in many cases, the cities are paying the utilities for those light poles in their monthly fees.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just want you to look into that a little bit more, please.
Okay. Thank you. Will do.
Chairman Wargo?
Thank you. Great report, a lot of work done, and I know we've been studying this from the legislative side or passing laws or whatever. The Connect America Fund, is that separate from our fund that the governor has put in monies for our broadband to underserved areas?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
That's from the federal dollars, because I
That's
noticed some
federal
of
dollars,
these,
yes.
because I noticed some of these counties are overlapping with the federal funds as well as some of the projects that we have done in the state. And I know sometimes there's some discrepancy if we're putting monies into a county that the federals are putting in. We have that opportunity. There is that opportunity to lose those federal funds. So are we looking? In your research that you have done, are we looking at those areas that we're not creating an overlapping from the Connect America funds and our funds that the state has put in and set aside for?
So, and my understanding, this would, to get a specific answer, it'd probably be best to ask the Department of Economic and Community Development and Amanda Martin, because she'll have the exact answer. But my understanding is whether or not, it's based on whether it has service. So I'd have to probably defer to her to answer that question specifically, but I do think it's something they take into account as to whether a location is already receiving funds or would already be eligible to receive funds under the Connect America Fund program.
Yeah, and I noticed that we have 17 different counties, as you had stated, but when you say locations, help me with what you mean by the 3,290 locations.
So locations, that's the term that the FCC uses for their CAF programs, and within locations they include both homes, so residential addresses, as well as business locations. So they include both that, and they calculate for each block or tract
All right, so a
what
block
number of
or,
locations that would
yeah,
be.
so a block or a tract, that isn't just, is that just one location? Or there might be 10 homes or 20 homes off of that location?
It could be that, yeah, it could be the number of homes or businesses
Okay.
fully within that.
That
tract.
makes
It
me feel
wouldn't-
better about the money that that we're spending per location, rather than,
Right, yeah, locations refers to the number of, not the number of tracks.
that's what I was
But the
thinking,
number-
but I
or the
wasn't,
number of
but
blocks.
looking at the way, I just wanted to get some
Correct.
clarity for
It's
that.
it's the number of
purposes.
homes and businesses within those blocks.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Great job on this report, and I know that a lot of people are interested in this, and I think, you know, the cry is out there that we want the access to it, so I think we should do everything in our powers, especially when it comes to the fees and mandating them or whatever, making it reasonable so that the businesses can answer the cry for the need that is out there. So thank you very much. Great job. Appreciate you.
Great. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Matt. All right, next, members, we'll turn to tab 9, and Senior Research Associate Bob Morio will introduce our panel. This project is on our excess property study.
Thank you, Cliff, and good morning, Commissioners. The Commission was directed to study by Public Chapter 693, Acts of 2018, study and determine the amounts of non-tax producing properties held by the state and local governments, and report on recommendations regarding the highest and best uses of those properties. So we're going to hear from a panel of state and local government experts. We have, to the left, to your right, Lisa Nolan, the Finance Director for Rutherford County, former Legislative Auditor and Controller of Tennessee Veterans Home. She's been the Budget and Finance Director in Rutherford County for 15 years. We have Ken Morrill, Manager of Special Projects for the Tennessee Controller of the Treasury. Ken has worked full-time in property assessment since 1982, first with Metropolitan Nashville and Davidson County, and for the majority of his career with the Tennessee Controller of the Treasury's Division of Property Assessments. We have Bruce Nelson, Director of Special Projects for the Tennessee Department of General Services. STREAM, the State of Tennessee Real Estate Asset Management Program. And we have Jeff Hogue, Director of the Right-of-Way Division from the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Jeff has been with TDOT for 28 years, throughout his career working with right-of-way, as a right-of-way agent, Chief of Relocation Assistance, Property Management, has been the Director of Right-of-Way since 2007. And we had been scheduled to have Brent Lambert, Mayor of the City of East Ridge, who unfortunately could not make it because of an unexpected personal issue that came up this week. So I give to you our panelists and take it from there.
Great, and I guess whichever order you all would like to proceed in. Do we just want to go from our right to the left? Okay, very good. Then that would be Ms. Nolan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here. I'm Lisa Nolan with Rutherford County, and I am here to answer any of your questions as kind of a overview of what we have in Rutherford County. We have 156 parcels that's allocated to Rutherford County, of which 10 are surplused and available to sell. And we've got 20 properties that we can't do anything with that we acquired through a FEMA flood mitigation program. So I'm not quite sure what y'all need to know, but that's how we have it in Rutherford County.
Do commissioners, we can either ask questions of each presenter, or we can wait till the end. It might be more comprehensive if we wait to the end. Yeah, let's do that then. Okay, great. Mr. Morrell.
Yes, my name is Kenneth Morrell. I'm with the State Division of Property Assessments, which is part of the Comptroller's Office. The Division of Property Assessments within the Comptroller's Office provides assistance, expertise, and oversight to county property assessors to ensure effective administration of the property tax. We also assist in reappraisal programs, provide technological services, and administer the property tax relief program. Property tax appraisals and assessments made by county assessors are maintained on the state computer-assisted appraisal system known as IMPACT for 84 of Tennessee's counties. Property assessment data from IMPACT has been provided to TACIR staff to help identify property owned by county and city governments for the study. Also, the Comptroller's Office of Local Government has provided land use information that they have compiled based on data from the IMPACT system. The data we provided from the IMPACT system to the TACIR staff includes the county, the parcel ID, something called the GIS link, which is a property identifier that links the assessment data to the GIS map data, the digital map data. The tax year, the property type, which is the classification of the property, the city where it's located, the owner name, and the property address. And then when it exists, we've also provided the number of land units, such as acres, square feet, front feet, so forth. The number of buildings, the land value, improvement value, and total appraised value. The properties we selected to provide fall into two groups. The first being the parcels having a property type that identifies them as being county-owned or city-owned. That was fairly straightforward. We also included parcels having other exempt property types that in the owner name might have the word county or city, town, metro, or the actual name of the county or city as a way to try to catch any additional properties that might be coded otherwise. We excluded some properties from that, such as those with the word church in the name. Didn't want to include those in the list. So there are a few challenges in using the assessment data to generate an absolute list of properties owned by county and city governments due to some variations in coding and owner name entries. So the approach taken was to include a universe of records that could indicate local government ownership, either in the property type or the owner name. That list could then be pared down by a TACIR staff before being provided to local governments for their review and input. Additionally, property characteristic data collected on governmentally owned exempt property is often limited, as the primary focus is on assessing taxable property. Appraised values are present on some exempt governmental properties, but not all. So the assessment data we provided to TACIR serves as a starting point that can be refined in order to provide a good working list of properties owned by local governments.
Great, thank you. And next was Mr.
Yes, my name is Bruce Nelson. I'm the Director of Special Projects, Acquisitions, Dispositions. I'm with the Department of General Services. Again, my division is STREAM, the State of Tennessee Real Estate Asset Management Group. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to answering any and all questions that you might have. Basically, we're here to effectuate a real estate strategy. We operate under 3 guiding principles, the first of which is program requirements and government initiatives drive our real estate strategies. The second is we employ financial matrix in our decision-making. And the third, and most important for this group, is that reduce the size of the real estate portfolio. As part of special projects, we have many tentacles of things we work on. As part of acquisitions, one of the things that I do not handle from an acquisition standpoint would be TDOT, TWRA, TDEC, or higher ed. If we do get involved with higher ed, it's more along the lines of a special assignment, more difficult valuation or something like that. The acquisitions that we do handle would be more strategic, something like we're going to go build a new THP headquarters. Where does that need to go? A TBI, things like that. Then we also, from an acquisition standpoint, might get involved with, let's say, a parking lot lease, something like that. That's more special projects at that time. Dispositions, most of the dispositions that I do, my group does, are the dispositions that go to market, not the ones that are directly sold or under a certain TDOT limit where they sell it directly to a contiguous landowner. We would get involved with selling properties to a municipality. If the municipality came to us and they needed a property and we happened to have it, we would deal with them directly. Other than that, you know, the acquisitions, the dispositions, we have two groups. Again, my group that is more on the business side of it, we have the land transactions group. They are within our compliance group. They're out there, they're actually physically closing the TWRAs, the TDECs, and the higher education when they have those acquisitions. So those acquisitions are being handled directly by the agency directly. So again, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here and answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you. Mr. Hoag?
Good morning, I'm Jeff Hoag with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, Director of Right-of-Way. And within the Right-of-Way Division, we have an excess land office, and that office is responsible for the management of our surplus property program through either sale, lease, license, change in access control, or transfer of jurisdiction. That office also is responsible for maintaining an inventory of what we call uneconomic remnants or loss of access property. When the department acquires properties and it's access controlled, we may landlock that property, and we have to offer to acquire that remainder from the landowner. So that would be obviously be surplus property to us. So we keep an inventory of that. Other than that, I can tell you that we're regulated by both state and federal laws, which have a lot of strings attached to them.
Very good, thank you. I will add before we take any questions the commission might have that when we received this study, we knew it was going to be kind of a challenging one to do this inventory, and we weren't wrong. But it's been a lot easier thanks to the work from our sister agencies, and we really do thank the Comptroller, Treasury, and Department of Transportation and other agencies who have assisted us with the data they have available. In addition to that data, we've also been surveying local governments across the state to get their perspective and also whatever information they have on excess properties, not only what excess property they have, but the procedures they use in determining whether that property has a better use and whether it could be sold or if there was something that would prevent that. With that said, we're happy to take questions, comments from the commission. Mayor McDonald.
Thank you, presenters. Especially to Ms. Nolan from Rutherford County, and unfortunately the mayor from local government from East Ridge couldn't be here. But a lot of the property that we have in Bartlett that is not on the tax rolls is expected to be used for drainage projects or parks sometime in the future. And so obviously this study has caused us to, you know, go back through and try to specify those things that we knew initially. So I just want, as the panel continues, as the commission continues to look at this, to consider that cities and counties have properties that they intend to use in the future that are non-taxable, and they may have been in a fallow state for a long time because we don't have the money to do the rest of the project, but they're still needed for that. The other thing is, and again to the lady from Rutherford County, one of the problems that, particularly at the county level, we've seen is the sovereign citizens putting property in the names of people or putting deeds into their names, and trying to get away from taxes as well. And so as we look at this as a commission, we need to try to find a way to stop that. That's a burden, and it's happening all across the state. So I would just put that out there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mayor Greer?
Mr. Chair, this would be directed to Ms. Nolan. When we started talking about this study, they called me and I got our city of Paris involved in discussion and wished that she could have been on the panel today. In the rural communities, we don't have a lot of usable excess properties that we can go to, but we have a real challenge when we hold a tax sale. I had to go through 4 attorneys before I found an attorney that would take on the challenge of going through a delinquent property tax sale. Well, the number of years that evolved in that, we ended up with 460 properties, very few of them really marketable in any way. But the biggest challenge came, we got with rural development and says, let's take some of these lots, if you have an interest in it, and let's do something with these lots. Rural development really wanted to work with us on that. But the challenge then became we couldn't sell those properties to them for $1, $500, or anything to allow people to build houses on those properties because we couldn't get title insurance for the properties. Just going through the problems with delinquent tax property through the redemption periods and things like that, even when you pass those things, it's hard to get a title insurance company to issue insurance on that property, so we couldn't work with rural development. We also tried to go to Habitat for Humanity and gift some properties through the proper procedure to them. Well, the people that would want to build on the property couldn't get any of the banks to loan the money. So it's a real challenge, and I know we looked at this for a different reason, but I think opening up, we ought to really look how communities, counties, cities, in the case that the city holds a delinquent tax sale, how we can make that a better process. In Henry County, because we have so much property on the lake, which back in the 70s, a lot of that property was sold, buy a piece of property in Tennessee for $50. In these little lots, people never paid tax on it. So we're sitting with probably 400 or 500 lots in those little old subdivisions around the lake that are showing on our assessment rolls at a nice value, but has absolutely no value. When this study came up, I thought this is a real chance that we can delve into something that's probably a problem all across Tennessee, because most of us won't come up and admit we can't have a tax sale because we don't know what to do with the property, and the statutes require us to have, the mayor has to have a tax sale. Well, we looked at it when we had the tax sale. Our purchasers that bought that property at risk that they had to buy it at, we're not getting the money that even the good properties need to bring. So I just would like this study to encompass that as we go along. Thank you.
Ms. Nolan, do you have anything to add on that topic from Rutherford County's perspective?
Well, we don't share your pain there. Yeah. As I said, we've got on our books right now only 10 pieces of property that were acquired through tax sale. As far as Rutherford County, there is a process. There's a tax sale every June in Rutherford County, and it is our delinquent tax attorney is the one who handles that. We've got somebody on staff who works this all year long with the delinquents.
I would add that the tax sale process is something that we did look at in part when we did our study on blighted property several years ago, but it's certainly something that I think we've already identified. It's something we need to take another look at as part of this project as well.
Sure. With regard to the cost involved with us, time we do our title opinions on the property before we have the tax sales. In our county sales for all the cities or municipalities within the county, we hold one tax sale. But we being the county out of the general fund have to front all the money for that, and we never recover that money back. And then the properties that we have to buy in, we have to have an interlocal agreement with the other cities and say, hey, till these sell, you're not going to get your money. If not, we couldn't, it would cause a significant issue within our county. So probably in the rural counties have a bigger problem than the metropolitan counties, without question. So it's just, I've been wanting to see something come up on this for a long time. I'm just glad that Judge Carter thought this would be good to bring before us, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I know y'all didn't want to talk about delinquent tax property, but that's my problem. Thank you.
Chairman Carter, your name has been called. And this study was actually started with your bill and was a discussion going back. Did we have any, I'm sorry, Chairman Watson, did you have a question? Did you have anything you wanted to add, Chairman Carter?
My friend the senator just asked me where you headed with this, and I said, I don't know. Only, I think Senator Watson carried this in the Senate and agreed with it. This originated at the Bass Pro Shop opening in East Ridge, Tennessee, when the mayor of East Ridge came up to me and thanked me profusely for helping locate Bass Pro Shop. I thought it was a political comment, and I remembered having nothing to do with it. And so I said, Mayor, how in the world did I help you do this? He reminded me that we'd written a letter to the surplus property part of TDOT, and I then learned that almost that entire project was located at an interchange on surplus property previously off the tax rolls owned by TDOT. And so it dawned on me, goodness, how much property is there throughout the state that could be turned from non-income producing to income producing? So I don't know. I don't know what I want. I don't know where I'm headed. That's why Bo was so helpful, or Senator Watson was so helpful in all this. Here's my concern. Ma'am from Rutherford, you mentioned you had two pieces of property or some property from FEMA that's flood zoned and you can't do anything with it. You may not be aware, I was not until recently, there's a federal program where I can buy that problem and dig ponds on it and sell that to Walmart when they want to abolish a wet area. And there are people making millions of dollars at that. I know because I had one contact me for some 7 acres that I have that TDEC has said you can't do anything with it. And they're saying, oh, yeah, we can come in and dig ponds on it, and we'll pay you for that property. So, see, there's all these things I just don't know about. But my concern is, the simple statement is I want non-income producing property turned into income producing property. The problem that Mayor Greer's got over there is something that's throughout the state. Shelby County is just perplexed with it. I had hoped that if we learn what all land's out there, then we would come back with a bill that would declare what is surplus property. And once declared, you can sell it for $1 an acre, or Shelby County could clean up their areas. So the method behind the madness is we first got to understand what we've got before we can understand what to do with it. And Dr. Lippert came to my office when he saw this bill filed and said, good Lord, do you realize what you're doing? And I said, yeah, that's why we've got you. So figure it out and do the best you can. And I realize this may take 2 or 3 years or 2 or 3 cycles, but as I dealt with some things for Hamilton County back in the day on property sales, there are a lot of problems out there that we need to get corrected. And the whole import of this is if I don't know you've got that land, how am I going to know to do anything with it? So what I want are developers and entrepreneurs to be able to go to some site, the comptroller, the TDOT, general services, and say, wow, I can do something with that building. Senator Watson and I recently got an email where the old highway department out on Cromwell Road is going to be declared surplus and sold. I immediately sent that to our realtor board in Hamilton County, and I said, somebody get this sold, because that will produce sales taxes for Hamilton County and make a useful part of the building. So that's my thought, and I appreciate TDOT doing that for us, and I thought that was great. So that's the method behind this. If I knew enough to do it, I wouldn't have done it the way I did it. But that's the purpose, and I appreciate Senator Watson I think he was there that morning. So that's the origin of this. We would not have Bass Pro Shop, which has been an enormous benefit to the city of East Ridge. That's why I hope that Mayor Lambert could be here. Just absolutely a real turnaround in their economy, all because TDOT cooperated and let them have that surplus property. So that's the thought behind it. Governments are so restricted on funding now. Our mayors of both cities and counties are incredibly reluctant to raise taxes. So let's expand the base. That's the method behind the madness. I'm like, I guess, everyone here. I've got a lot of questions, very few answers, but I appreciate you all participating in such a difficult issue, and especially to our body here. TACIR has done such a good job and will continue to until we figure out something we can do.
Good. Thank you. Chairman Watson, as the Senate sponsor, do you have anything to add? Okay, very good. Any other questions then from the?
I just might add, Representative Carter, you mentioned TDOT. In Morristown, we have been working with some projects and then also inventorying our surplus properties, and we're providing those to TACIR. But we found in order to continue to pursue a project, we had to go back and have all of our parks resurveyed because the surveys that they were under when we acquired them, because their dates go back so far, are not up to date. So we're having to go back and do an up-to-date survey on our parklands. So that's just an aside. And going one way, we found out we had to complete another project as well.
Chairman.
Mayor, who asked you to do that? Who required you to resurvey your own parks?
TDOT.
Not in your office, I assume?
Talk to you later.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I can check into it for you.
Okay, thank you. We're in the process of completing it.
Chairman Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. You know, we get an annual report on unclaimed property, which is pretty exhaustive and pretty extensive. Is there any kind of repository for this kind of data that where we would know? And I'm assuming I may be going where you're going. That we could either have or develop where an individual or a county would be able to go exactly to that site. No, I mean, we have literally thousands of unclaimed property that we're able to manage at the state level. Can you make a comment on that?
Are you talking about personal property or real property?
Well, what I'm actually talking about a methodology more than we have unclaimed, the Office of the Treasurer produces a report of all of the unclaimed property and it's thousands of pieces of data that members then often take and go to their specific district and mail out that specific data about electric deposit that someone never received, various types of unclaimed, usually financial type things. I was curious as to why, and this may be for TACIR to consider, why a similar type of database could not be maintained by the state for all of these types of properties.
I would defer to TACIR on some kind of study like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the direction that this is correct, and correct me if I'm mistaken, I think that's the kind of direction that when Chairman Carter said, we got to try and figure out what we have before we can necessarily figure out what to do with it. I think that would be one of the intents of the legislation. And I guess I'm posing the question as to, is there some reason that would not be possible? I think it's free. I like free dialogue, so I assume the chairman will recognize you.
Okay. I mean, again, it's something. I guess all the different governments would have to report in whether or not at what point is the property surplus. Because as one gentleman already explained, we have properties and there are plans that are not surplus. I mean, we will hold them for some time, but. I wouldn't want to put all these properties out for somebody to grab unless they were truly surplus. There was no need for it in the government. body.
And I apologize to the commission for my ignorance on this, because this isn't an area that I have much knowledge of. And Mr. Chairman, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but is there a definition for surplus property? I mean, if you hold a piece of property for 50 years because you think that some government use for it might be applicable, how does the local government define a piece of property as surplus?
We don't need it, and we want it on the tax roll to be income producing.
Okay. So hypothetically, with the election of a new administration every 4 years, they make the determination as to whether something is surplus or not surplus. And please stop me, Mr. Chairman, if
You're fine, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. When you declare a piece of property that's surplus, or when a state or local government declares a piece of property that is surplus, do you report that to any? There's not a reporting mechanism to the state or anything like that. Okay, so that would seem to be, Mr. Chairman, kind of the first step. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
To interrupt. Basically, when we've identified a property as being surplus, okay, and that we're no longer need, we want to get it back out to the tax roll, so to speak, get it back to private industry. We do send out a preliminary notice, a 20-day preliminary notice to the senators in that district to let them know that a property has become available. But we also send that to our agencies in case an agency goes, we were just ready to expand and we need that building for whatever reason. We've done transfer of jurisdictions before. So we do notify the local senators that we are selling the property. There's a 20-day period before we actually walk it into executive subcommittee for approval to actually physically sell the property. It immediately, once we have that approval, we put it on a website. Okay, it's on the DGS website. It's a real estate tab that you can tab down. And of course, y'all can sign up and be on our mail out blast list and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, it's then put out to market. So there is a website of those property that are currently being sold. There are surplus.
Right. So the state maintains, and I know we went through a lengthy process, even for the state, of figuring out what we owned and what we didn't own. But the state maintains a database of surplus property that would be available. So, and I don't want to do TACIR's work for them here, but because I'm ignorant to this, I'm just kind of interested at this point. So, what would be the barriers to local government, the state providing local government with a similar type of methodology where once a piece of property has been declared surplus by whatever methodology the local government uses to do that, it's then filed into this database where people can have access to it, which I think is where Chairman Carter is trying to get at with the legislation, where people can have active access to it so that they know that the property is available.
What are the things?
What would be the barriers, right?
Well, I don't think there's any barriers necessarily. Once we've deemed a property surplus, we are actively and aggressively trying to sell that property. Once it's deemed surplus. So the information, the database that you would be looking for would be after we've decided we no longer need the property. Before that, it would be in review for some reason. We've got campuses, very large campuses that we have numerous buildings on, but the property is not positioned yet to be deemed surplus. So that would never go onto a list because it's just not ready to go. So again, once we've deemed it surplus, I mean, we're out there actively marketing and trying to get it sold, get those dollars back to the taxpayers, get it back into the local tax roll.
Okay. And I guess to the members on the commission from the rural areas that have maybe some unique challenges that the more suburban urban areas don't, would that be an asset to you? Would that be, I mean, for the record, I guess you can speak
Mayor
to
Greer?
I think it would. I think that's a step in the direction to try to do something where we know what we can declare surplus. And once again, what impacts us is that delinquent tax property. So, yes.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, if I might ask of the member, do you use the same methodology for defining a surplus property as the gentlewoman from Rutherford used?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I think I've done enough damage here and in terms of showing my ignorance to this process. But I think with the technology that's available to us today, this might go a long way towards helping counties and local governments to dispense of pieces of property, because if you put something on a database that's now available to all of the public, and that means all of the public, all of a sudden you have increased your potential buyers exponentially, rather than, I assume, you publish it in a newspaper or whatever, which in today's world has a very limited, compared to the internet world, has a very limited audience. This opens it up to a worldwide audience, and I'll yield to other members, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. I would add, before we go on to Chairman Wargo, one of the things that we're doing as part of the survey process that I mentioned earlier is gathering information from local governments on what processes they already have in place and how they define surplus property, because not everyone defines it the same way. We want to make sure that we have complete information before we go forward. But this is the type of methodology you're speaking is certainly something that we'll look at as part of the study as we go forward. Chairman Wargo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm going to chime in, and Senator Watson, to show my ignorance as well. How do we define for the surplus of the property the mechanism of how the property is for sale? I think that's another thing. If Bass Pro wanted to come into East Ridge, as Chairman Carter has alluded to, and wow, we have this piece of property, you look on the tax roll, but yet there's no tax roll for it because it's not on the tax roll. How do you define what that property is out there? So, as he says, where are we headed with this? I'm not certain, but I think we stand here all as legislators and county mayors and some citizens on this committee to say, we don't want to be raising taxes or whatever, but how do we continue to get our revenue up? So I guess, what is the mechanism of, or is there a mechanism out there of how these properties, vacant properties, would be listed for sale? Is there a mechanism for that? I mean, you have surplus property, but so do you just sit on the property, or is it advertised for sale, or what does the departments do in this case?
Sure. TCA 12-112 basically covers how we are able to sell properties. We have two methods that we could sell a property under. One is seal bid method, or two, by way of a live auction. I believe it also covers us for an internet type auction. But basically, we've been effectuating sealed bids. We have held one auction before, so that was a property that was here downtown. In very rural cases where we have residential lots that are in a very small town, I can't properly market those, and we've gone back to our executive committee and asked for the authority, the approval to sell through a broker. So we do have that ability to utilize the brokerage community. But typically our sales are done by way of sealed bid. If we feel that the sealed bid at a certain point, we've done it a couple of times and it's just not working, we might have to retool ourselves, look at the real estate. We do a good job at looking at our real estate and recommending if we think it should be an auction or a broker situation or the sealed bid method.
But I would say that probably after listening to all of this, there are probably some parcels out there, and I don't know what that tract size was for the Bass Pro, but there are probably those tracts out there that really are not on your radar as listed for sale, because maybe we bought it at one time for right-of-way or to put an intersection in or something. and then didn't use as much as we thought we would use, or didn't end up doing the project, as in some cases in Henry County, I can testify to that. And so we're still sitting on that property, but without any real, well, this would be great to put up for sale, et cetera. So this is very interesting, and I realize there's a lot of work yet to be done, but I appreciate your input. But I'm just curious for mechanisms of how, because as Senator Watson stated, we have that unclaimed properties, which I would say probably unclaimed assets more than real property. There should be that kind of mechanism in place for a listing of what we own that may be available.
And I can tell you from TDOT standpoint, we're regulated. From TDOT standpoint, we're regulated, and we have to sell to either the former owner, if it's within 10 years, or the adjoining landowner. So it would be, if the adjoining landowners or former, they don't want it, then we would turn it over to Bruce's office, and that doesn't happen that often.
So when you have the excess that you have, if I heard you correctly, and forgive me, I hear you say it's got to go back to the previous owner that you bought it from.
If it's within 10 years, they have the first right of refusal.
They have the first right, and if not, then an adjoining landowner of that property.
And in this case, in Bass Pro, they were the adjoining, they went in and bought the property that adjoined that property.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Chairman Carter.
Thank you all so much for this, and Cliff and the staff, thank you. We knew this was going to be a big elephant to eat, but we got to start somewhere. Many years ago, I owned a farm that TDOT came through, and they needed 9.1 acres, which to me was an absurdity. And so I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take your ridiculously low offer if you will agree to refund to me by deed every piece of property not needed by your manual of how to build roads. We put all of that in the court order. They ended up with 2.1 acres. I got 7 acres back. And everyone said, how do you do that? How did the law do that? The law didn't do it. We did it by court order. If you drive out through there now, you will see all kinds of businesses we've sold because now we own TDOT took right up and made us road frontage. Everyone laughed at how stupid we were to take such a low offer, and then a few years later they were saying, well, wait a minute, how did you do that? That's what's in the back of my mind. Take the least you need, turn the rest into commercial development. Now, I bought that farm, or we bought that farm, because it was a big hill, good for no one, except we owned 60 acres right below it, zoned industrial, that was within the flood zone. We needed the dirt to put in the hole, and that's the reason we bought it. I understand TDOT will be the same way. You'll have property that everyone will say, this is ridiculous. Why are they keeping this on the roll? Because your engineer is going to need that dirt in 7 years. I understand that. That's not surplus property. My thought and idea is if it has a projected reasonable use, then we don't want the government's harmed by it. But my concern in this, and now I'm getting way too far afield, because first we got to figure out what's there. I'm hoping we can develop some law where this property goes first back to the city that the property is located in, or the county, and let them control the development of it for a way that will maximize their tax revenues. And then we'll have to get into what does the city or what does the county pay TDOT or pay general services. I'm looking at this as a way, I've been involved in some litigation that limited the income of cities. I want to now do other things to increase that income in ways that make sense to them. So that's my idea and thoughts down the line. But anyway, it's a big deal. And I will say this, I'm the attorney for a little water utility called Eastside Water, Eastside Utility District, and we're required by the comptroller to define surplus property and to send to them our surplus property resolution. They have to approve it, send it back. Every worn-out bush hog or tractor we sell has to be sold pursuant to that and reported to the comptroller's office. So I don't think it's unreasonable for the rest of government to do that in such a way that helps. Certainly, the comptroller's watching us to make sure I don't end up with all the one-year-old tractors and the one-summer-old bush hogs, and I get that, and I appreciate that. But there has to be, as Senator Watson said, our technology has improved to the point where we've got to be able to disclose this stuff and let other people figure out what to do with it, not be limited like I was. I've got 7 or 8 acres in the flood zone that's worthless, and some guy flies in from Florida wanting to buy it. I didn't understand that. Once I understood his program, it is no longer for sale. I'll do it myself. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions for the panel? All right, thank you all very much. We appreciate your input. So that brings us to other business, unless there's anything else from the members, any other new business. And the one thing we have is the next meeting date, which we tentatively have set for either December 5-6 or December 12-13. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I would just like to say that Deputy Commissioner Paula Davis and I will not be available. Excuse me. Just thinking about it gets me choked up. Will not be available on the 5th or 6th because we have mandatory meetings at ECD. But so if it would be okay for folks, the 12th and 13th would work splendidly. That I'm just saying that. Otherwise, we won't be able to come.
Mayor McDonald agrees that's a better date. Any other, so December 12, 13? All right, we'll set December 12, 13 as the next meeting date. Thank you.
Thank you all
Chairman
very
Watson?
much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you may have discussed this yesterday, and I apologize that I wasn't able to be here, but being gainfully employed, sometimes it gets in the way of this. Senator Stevens had a bill, Senate Bill 1989, which dealt with non-participating manufacturers and the directory of certified tobacco products. Is this ringing a bell with you, Chairman?
Yes, Chairman Watson. And actually, I spoke with some lobbyists working related to that bill yesterday, and I think what the direction we're going to go on that is we're going to have a panel or a speaker on that bill at our December meeting to start preliminary research on that, so we can start moving it in the direction. Because of the other items on our work plan right now, I don't think we can move up the completion date on that report, but I think we can meet the intent of the bill as far as getting some information out on it before the next session starts.
And if not, Mr. Chairman, what is the? I was trying to look at the calendar, and I didn't see it. Maybe it's on the website, and I just couldn't find it. So, what is the tentative production date for that report?
As of right now, our completion date on that is our December 2019 meeting, which means we would have a draft report on it at the fall meeting, which would be in August or September of 2019.
Okay. So, and again, just to help me out here, so how does you square that with the law which requires you to report it back to the legislature in 2019? I think March 1 of 2019, I think, is what the law said.
I'll have to go back and check on that, Mr. Chairman. Our understanding was that particular public chapter did not have a due date on it. I could be mistaken. We'll confirm that.
Yeah, I'll just help you. It's amendment number 1 to the bill, and it's in section 1, last sentence. On or before March 1, 2019, TACIR shall report its findings and recommendations to the Finance, Ways and Means Committees of the Senate and the House of Representatives, Fiscal Review Committee of the General Assembly, and the Office of Legislative Budget Analysis.
Just a second, I'm confirming with my Deputy Executive Director, who's sometimes my brain.
That's okay.
My apologies, Chairman Watson. We're going to have to go back and check. Our understanding was that one, the bill was sent, it was only sent by one chamber, which I believe there was an amendment on it in the Senate, but not the House, but I may be confusing with another bill. Let me check our research plan and the legislation was sent to us, and I'll get with you after the meeting if that's okay.
Okay, sure, no problem. Just checking. Thank you.
Any other new business then?
I just wanted to ask the body here if anyone else had been informed, as we were last week at our councilman meeting by the planning director, that as of March 2019, that the post office is going to require subdivisions to have clusters of mailboxes for their subdivisions. They can no longer want to have individual mailboxes. And I don't think we can do anything with the federal government. I don't know, but had anybody else received that information yet? No one? Well, you might look at your post office for that letter then, so.
It's the first I've heard of that as well.
It was quite a shock to us. They were doing an analysis that says an individual mailbox costs about $150, and so they were doing it on a monetary analysis, I felt. But then they also said they're ADA available or accessible. My concern was that Ms. Jones, who cannot, she can navigate down to her own post office box at the end of her driveway, but she may not be able to navigate all the way over to the cluster mailboxes like they do in apartment complexes. So I'll send that to you. I'll send it to Cliff, and he can then send a director, and he can send it out to you.
We'll send that out, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other new business then? All right, seeing none. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mayor McDonald? Mr. Cardwell? Well, with great power comes great responsibility. I've got the gavel now.